know, like I said, normally I wake up and I think about a lot of shit. Be a lot of shit on my mind that I think about. So, like now, I shut down here and I fell asleep. Like at this rest area here in Pennsylvania on 81 westbound. But I woke up, right? So I was thinking about something that I was telling the guy earlier. We were talking about like the Dragon Ball series, all the way from Dragon Ball to Dragon Ball Z. We talked a little bit, touched on Dragon Ball GT. I really didn't take to Dragon Ball GT too well. It was the way they did Goku character at the end. He died off and shit. We couldn't. Nobody could take the Dragon Ball GT too well. It really was Dragon Ball GT was pointed out. Basically, if Dragon Ball GT, if Goku came back and he went through a universe and came back as a little boy, but when he turned to Super Saiyan 3, he had turned into this, it just, we didn't know why I didn't like it too well. But all the other Dragon Ball Z series, I went to Dragon Ball Z Super. Oh man, Dragon Ball Z Super you can relate to. But the funny thing is, the whole storyline of Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Dragon Ball Z. And when you really look at Dragon Ball Z, it reminds you, Toriyama, I don't know whether what Toriyama was consciously or subconsciously thinking, that this is a race of galactic conquerors. Their race is called the Saiyan race. And the Saiyan race were galactic conquerors that worked for be in the service of Frieza. Now this Frieza character was he basically went around conquering planets and conquering people. And he had a lot of other alien species that was his henchmen. But he had a great fear of the Saiyans, that one day the Saiyans will rise and destroy him. So he had a great and neat fear of the Saiyans. Now the funny thing is, the Saiyans were called monkeys. And you think about it, as a black individual, who else white people and other group of people sometimes relate to as monkeys? Think about it. Who white people always say we monkeys? They always call us monkeys, right? So the Saiyans, they were called monkeys by Frieza and by other groups, but they was the most powerful, one of the most powerful groups in Frieza's army, him and King Cold. So when you think about the Saiyans, that make you think about black people, right? Because black people good at a lot of shit, but a lot of our achievements are downplayed. Well, in Dragon Ball Z, a lot of Saiyans' feats were downplayed. Everything was downplayed when it came to the Saiyans. But the Saiyans, became one of the most powerful race in Dragon Ball, in the Dragon Ball series. Not only, in fact, did they come powerful at the end, Son Goku, or Kakarot, he defeated Frieza. And when that puts you in the mind of the Saiyans, you think about how white people treat black people. And I think of white supremacy and white supremacists as I think of them as King Cole and Frieza. And I think of the black people as Saiyans. I think everything that the white supremacists do it to try to sabotage our greatness when you really want to think about it. Because they turn around and say that we was never no great people, we never did shit, we never invented shit. When everything you look at right here in this country, we invented from the internet, for 2G, 3G, we invented that shit. And they don't want to give us credit for it. Who else didn't want to give nobody credit for shit? Freezer didn't want to give the Sands credit for it, because giving the Sands credit for it would admit their inferiority complex that they have. And Freezer had a what? Inferiority complex. So he had the need to keep the Sands below him. When you think about it, this is why black people relate to the series Dragon Ball Z series so much. And I thought I was the only one in my 50s. I started looking at Dragon Ball back when it was, in the early 90s and shit. But the series got real popular once they aired it on the cable networks and shit like that, on Cartoon Network and shit. It caught off to, now Dragon Ball Z is one of the top animes in the United States. Next to, you got other ones, but that was the Dragon Ball series. The Dragon Ball Z was the quintessential series to start all the animation other than Speed Racer, because a lot of people don't know Speed Racer, that was an anime. So we were getting a lot of anime here in the 70s and shit. But Dragon Ball Z is a reason why a lot of black people can relate to that anime more than anything. Dragon Ball Z, we can relate to it because the Saiyans kind of remind black people of ourselves. We see ourselves in the Saiyans. That's why we relate to Dragon Ball Z so much, because we actually see ourselves in the Saiyans. All the shit that the Saiyans was going through, their planet destroyed by Frieza. And you think about it, what white people did with what white supremacists did with our communities, thriving. What they do the same thing like Frieza, destroyed our communities. That's why I say the white supremacists had a Frieza-like mindset. They had a Frieza-like mindset. But let me know in the comment section if you all ever thought about that. I know a lot of y'all have.